Dynamic content is how you transform your data into insights. Dynamic content can take the form of text, charts, tables, or images, and can be defined by something as simple as a field lookup or as complex as a SQL query. Today we are going to be talking about the 3 types of dynamic content you can build in Matik: data-driven, static, and conditional dynamic content. To create a new piece of dynamic content, first click on the Dynamic Content tab at the top of the page in Matik, and then click on the Add New button. From here, you will name your piece of dynamic content, add a description, and add tags with your content that can make searching for it in Matik easier moving forward. You can either choose an existing tag or easily create a new one. After populating these fields, select which type of dynamic content you are looking to create: data-driven, static, or conditional. The first type of content is data-driven. Choose this option if you want to pull data directly from a data source into your presentation. Depending on the data source you select, you will either be asked to write a SQL query to pull the data or be asked which fields Matik needs to look up. Let's start with a piece of data-driven dynamic content that uses a SQL query to pull information. Select data-driven and then choose your data source. In this case, our data source is Redshift. Then choose how you want the data to be outputted. You can select either text, chart, table, or image, and then write your SQL query to pull the data from Redshift. To learn more about supported output types, head over to Matik's Help Center and navigate to the section on Content. As you write your SQL query, you will need to write in inputs using an ampersand and colon before the desired input name. As a reminder, inputs are the pieces of information that your end user will need to provide in order for Matik to pull the data into your presentation. To learn more about inputs and how to configure them, go to Matik's Help Center and click on the section Inputs. When you're done, you can test your query by clicking the Test Query button and by filling out the inputs linked to this piece of content. Don't forget to press Add to save your new piece of content. You can also create data-driven content by looking up fields. This option only exists for specific data sources such as Tableau, Looker, and Salesforce. Press Add New, fill out a name, a description, and add tags. Then press Data-Driven and select your data source. In this example, we'll be working with Salesforce. Select the output of your content and click API. A wizard will appear that you can walk through to select which objects or reports you want to pull from Salesforce and the specific fields or columns associated with those objects and reports. You will also provide the inputs that Matik will need your end user to fill out in order to pull your data. Make sure to test your new piece of content by clicking the Test API button and filling out the inputs linked to this piece of content. Then, press Add to save it. To learn more in-depth information about using Salesforce as a data source for your data-driven content, go to Matik's Help Center and click on the section Content. The second type of dynamic content is static content. As with any new piece of content, you will want to provide a name, a description, and potentially select tags for this piece of content. Any information that you type in the open box below is going to be pulled and represented in your presentation in the format that you choose. The most common type of static content is an input value, where the input value that's chosen by the end user will then be used anywhere that it's tagged in the template. In this specific example, the name and date will be included directly in your template and can be edited here within the piece of content in Matik at the start of a new year, and then will be updated across all templates that this piece of dynamic content is found in, instead of someone having to manually update it one by one. The third and final type of dynamic content is conditional content. After clicking Add New, select the word Conditional. Then add a name, description, and any potential tags for this new piece of content. Lastly, you will need to click the button that says Add Condition Group. A condition group allows you to control whether or not a piece of dynamic content should be added to a presentation by specifying the conditions it needs to meet in order to be created. It's a great way to automate quality control and make sure that the right insights are being displayed at the right time. You can include as many conditions as you like, but all of them need to be fulfilled to have the resulting piece of dynamic content returned in your presentation. In this example, this piece of dynamic content will only populate in your presentation if the inputs entered exceed 50 and the industry technology is selected. And that's everything you need to know about the 3 different kinds of dynamic content that you can create in Matik. If pieces of dynamic content are personalized insights, then inputs are the way that you tell Matik who to personalize that content for. The creation of inputs can take place one of 2 ways. The first is to choose the Inputs tab at the top of the page and click on either the Add New or Add Input button. The input name is what you will reference as an admin when you include inputs in your dynamic content. The following field, Display Name, is the name that appears to end users when they generate a presentation. We recommend making sure that the display name makes clear what the input is asking, and also leveraging the description to provide further instruction and clarity. The input source field is how you choose the format for the given input that your end users will be interacting with. User input means the user themselves will be required to enter the input value. List requires you as the admin to add a series of values to the section on this page that the end user will then have the option to select from when generating a presentation. Query involves the selection of one of your company's databases and a coinciding SQL query to pull values in that the end user will then choose from. And finally, API accesses an existing integration between Matik and certain data sources to return specific data as options for an end user to select. In this example, we'll demonstrate a list-based input, which will include the options Sales, Marketing, and Customer Success. The configuration type is going to be single select dropdown, but note that these other configuration types are also available. Once everything appears to be correct, the last step is to click Add. Once added, inputs can be referenced in pieces of dynamic content with the term &:. Within a piece of content, an existing input will appear with orange script in the included input section, but a new one will appear as gray. The other method for creating an input is directly within this piece of content by clicking on that gray text. This will result in a pop-up window where you will enter in the same pieces of information that are required when creating an input from the Inputs tab in Matik. The appearance and ability to populate certain inputs can also be tied to the selection of a previous input. This is a scenario of a dependent input. For example, customer name may not be an editable field until the prior account owner input is populated. A piece of dynamic content requires that you designate an output type so that Matik knows the format the content should be in and what will eventually be tagged. Formats include text, tables, charts, and images. Text means that the dynamic content will be placed in the form of text into your presentation. This example piece of dynamic content is data-driven and contains a SQL query that pulls information about active users. The associated output value is text, which means that this will be populated within a text box in the template or templates it is associated with. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see the number of templates that a piece of dynamic content is tied to, if any exist. By clicking on this, you can select the template that this piece of content comes from, and even search for the piece of content within the template by using the search bar on the right-hand side of your screen, under Content. Subcontent allows you to pull in a specific field from a single piece of dynamic content that returns multiple values. For example, if you have a table of user information and want to pull only the value of a single column, you can do so with subcontent. Adding subcontent is simple with the Google Slides add-on. Add the tag for the dynamic content which contains the desired subcontent. After adding this tag to your template, select the Templates Tag tab in the add-on. Select the piece of dynamic content you just added, and in the text box here, enter the field or column name of the subcontent that you want added. Make sure to click Save when finished. To tag subcontent in PowerPoint, replace the text that you want tagged with double curly brackets and identify it with a number inside. Then open the Alt text box. Start with the double curly brackets, then enter the number of the tag that you want the subcontent to replace. Next, type colon, followed by the name of the dynamic content. After the name of this parent dynamic content, type period, followed by the name of the subcontent. If you are tagging more than one piece of content, make sure to separate them by commas and then end it with the same double curly brackets. That's it! You've now added subcontent tags to this presentation. As a reminder, a piece of dynamic content requires that you designate an output type so that Matik knows the format the content should be in. Formats include text, tables, charts, or images. The second kind of output type is table, which means that the information captured by the dynamic content will be placed in a table in your finished presentation. In this example, the piece of dynamic content is pulling two fields from the data source: date and sum of tickets solved. These fields are then populated in a table within the template that this piece of dynamic content is associated with. Unlike some other output types, a table output will auto-populate the appropriate number of columns and rows to match the fields and values outlined in the dynamic content query. That being said, the table object itself needs to be created in the presentation platform of your template, either Google Slides or PowerPoint. Matik will not pull the actual table from your data source, just the data within it, and therefore needs a table in your template to dump the data into. The next output type is charts, which means that the dynamic content will be configured as a chart in your finished presentation. In this example, as with the tables example before, the piece of dynamic content is pulling two fields from the data source: date and the sum of tickets solved. These fields will be populated in the supporting spreadsheet of the chart within the presentation that this piece of content is tied to. An important aspect to the chart output type is that the chart selected for the dynamic content needs to be created first in the presentation platform of your template, either Google Slides or PowerPoint, and must be formatted to include a data range expansive enough for the data fields and columns being called in the query. The last output type is images, which means that the dynamic content will be placed as an image in your associated finished presentation. An important detail to an image output type is that the object you are planning on populating in your presentation must be an image and not a shape or other element meant as a placeholder for an image. For example, a circle for a profile photo or a text box. This piece of dynamic content is pulling a photo from Salesforce and populating it in the presentation automatically based on the specific sales rep selected. We will now dive deeper into how to create a piece of data-driven content using Salesforce as a data source. Matik has a fairly robust connection with Salesforce in terms of dynamic content creation, making the process pretty simple either through our API or a query. An important initial step to creating a piece of data-driven dynamic content with Salesforce is to make sure that the account you are logged into Matik with also has access to the Salesforce data source. Once this piece is confirmed, you will click on the Dynamic Content tab at the top of the screen in Matik and click the Add New button. Choose Data Driven, give your new piece of dynamic content a name, a description, associate some optional tags for greater filtering and identification in the future, and then search and select your Salesforce data source. You will see two options when it comes to creating a query. The default is to leverage Salesforce's SQL language and to either write or copy-paste a query in the dedicated section on this page. Selecting API is the alternative, which brings up a source field. If you choose an object as your source, Matik pulls all of the objects present in your Salesforce database into this objects field. If you select reports, Matik does the same for that info type. The reports shown will be the last viewed reports over the past 120 days for the connected Salesforce account. Both of these options result in the columns to return, filters, and result order fields to appear. The object source option also causes the result limit box to appear. After you populate all of the necessary fields, you should perform a test of the Salesforce query to ensure that the resulting information is correct. If it is, the last step is to click on the Add button in the bottom right. We will now dive deeper into how to create a piece of data-driven content using Tableau as a data source. The initial step to configuring a piece of dynamic content that leverages Tableau as a data source is to ensure that the account you are logged into with Matik has access to the dashboards you are planning on referencing in your data-driven query. Once this piece is confirmed, you will click on the Dynamic Content tab at the top of the screen and click the Add New button. Give your new piece of dynamic content a name, a description, associate some optional tags for greater filtering and identification in the future, and then search and select your Tableau data source. Finally, you will select the workbook that you are interested in pulling data from. You will then provide the specific view of the workbook you're interested in, and then the ensuing fields will appear for entry. Filter returned fields, filters, result sorting, and result limit. After populating all of the applicable fields, you will want to test the query before adding it as an available piece of dynamic content. After successfully testing, you can click on Add in the lower right corner to add this piece of dynamic content to your Matik instance. We will now dive deeper into how to create a piece of data-driven content using Looker as a data source. The initial step to configuring a piece of dynamic content that leverages Looker as a data source is to ensure that the account you are logged into Matik with has access to the dashboards or models that you plan on referencing in your data-driven query. Once this piece is confirmed, click on the Dynamic Content tab at the top of the screen and click the Add New button. Choose Data-Driven Content, give your new piece of dynamic content a name, a description, associate some optional tags for greater filtering and identification in the future, and then search and select your Looker data source. An API configuration between Looker and Matik will allow you to designate a source, either a dashboard or model, and you will then designate the specific dashboard or model you are interested in. The next step is selecting a dashboard query value, and then associating filters that exist in Looker to correlate with input values in Matik. Input values are present in Matik to end users when they generate presentations, and are values that assist in refining a query. To get a refresher on inputs, go to Matik's Help Center and select the section on Inputs. You can also order results by a specific field in Looker, as well as provide fields to factor into pivoting and limit the number of results that are returned. The last two sections to populate are a query time zone, if applicable, and fields to return, which are the values that will be pulled and eventually placed into your template. By clicking the checkbox on the bottom, you can also apply formatting directly in Looker to the content being pulled and populated. As with any piece of dynamic content, testing your query before making it available is highly important to ensure that the information being returned is correct. After performing successful tests, you can click on Add in the lower right corner to add this piece of dynamic content to your Matik instance. We will now dive deeper into how to create a piece of data-driven content using a Google Sheet as a data source. An important initial step to creating a piece of data-driven dynamic content with a Google Sheet is to make sure that the account you use with Matik also has access to the Google Sheet data source. Once this is confirmed, click on the Dynamic Content tab at the top of the screen, and then click on the Add New button. Select Data Driven, give your dynamic content a name, a description, and add tags to make it easier to find the dynamic content in the future, if desired. Then search for and select your Google Sheet file. Next, you will need to define inputs and define outputs. Inputs are the data that you want to pass into the Google Sheet that will help calculate the output. The outputs are the data you want Matik to pull from the Google Sheet and insert into your finished presentation. Outputs can be a single cell or even a range of cells. To tell Matik which cells in your Google Sheet you want your input to go into, simply click into the appropriate field in Matik under Sheet Inputs. You will see a view of your Google Sheet file, and from this you can select the input cells, and the cell reference will be automatically entered into the input field in Matik. Then, use an &, followed by the input name, to tell Matik which input you want to be inputted into this cell or cells in your Google Sheet. Inputs you add will appear here, in the Included Input section, where you can further configure them. The orange text indicates an existing input, while the gray text will appear if this is a new input that you still need to configure. To learn more about inputs, go to the Matik Help Center and click on the Inputs page. To tell Matik which cells in your Google Sheet you want to be outputted into your finished presentation, click again into the appropriate field in Matik under Sheet Output, and then select the output cells in the Google Sheet view. After you populate all of the necessary fields, make sure to press Test API to ensure that the information being returned is correct. If it is, the last step is to click on the Add button in the bottom right corner.